Today, we're back with some ASMR history, and it's actually been an insanely long time since we did a strictly history video, and I didn't realise until I'd gone back through the schedule that it's literally been a good couple of months, I think, if not longer, so it's well overdue. And today, rather than looking at a particular event or time period, we're going to be taking a look at a significant historical figure in King Henry VIII. Definitely a very, very interesting historical person. As always, leave requests for historical people, events, etc. that you would like to see covered on the channel in the future, but I don't want to waste any more time introing. Let's just get into the history of King Henry VIII. So, King Henry VIII, born June 28, 1491, in Greenwich near London, presided over the beginnings of the English Renaissance and the English Reformation. His 6 wives were successively Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. So let's begin with his accession to the throne. Henry was the second son of Henry VII, first of the Tudor line, and Elizabeth, daughter of Edward IV, first king of the short-lived line of York. When his elder brother Arthur died in 1502, Henry became the heir to the throne. Of all the Tudor monarchs, he alone spent his childhood in calm expectation of the crown, which helped give an assurance of majesty and righteousness to his willful, ebullient, never heard of that word before, character, ebullient. He excelled in book learning as well as in the physical exercises of an aristocratic society, and when in 1509 he ascended the throne, great things were expected of him. 6 feet tall, powerfully built, and a tireless athlete, huntsman and dancer, he promised England the joys of spring after the long winter of Henry VII's reign. Henry and his ministers exploited the dislike inspired by his father's energetic pursuit of royal rights by sacrificing, without a thought, some of the unpopular institutions and some of the men that had served his predecessor. Yet the unpopular means for governing the realm soon reappeared because they were necessary. Soon after his accession, Henry married Catherine of Aragon, Arthur's widow, and the attendant lavish entertainments ate into the modest royal reserves. More serious was Henry's determination to engage in military adventure. Europe was being kept on the boil by rivalries between the French and Spanish kingdoms, mostly over Italian claims, and against the advice of his older councillors, Henry in 1512 joined his father-in-law Ferdinand II of Aragon against France, and ostensibly in support of a threatened pope, to whom the devout king for a long time paid almost slavish respect. Henry himself displayed no military talent, but a real victory was won by the Earl of Surrey at Flodden in 1513 against a Scottish invasion. Despite the obvious pointlessness of the fighting, the appearance of success was popular. Moreover, in Thomas Wolsey, who organised his first campaign in France, Henry discovered his first outstanding minister. By 1515, Wolsey was Archbishop of York, Lord Chancellor of England, and a Cardinal of the the church. More important, he was the king's good friend, to whom was gladly left the active conduct of affairs. Henry never altogether abandoned the positive talks of kingship and often interfered in business, though the world might think that England was ruled by the cardinal. The king himself knew that he possessed perfect control any time he cared to assert it, and Wolsey only rarely mistook the world's opinion for the right one. Nevertheless, the years from 1515 to 1527 were marked by Wolsey's ascendancy, and his initiative set the scene. The cardinal had some occasional ambition for the papal tiara, and this Henry supported. Wolsey at Rome would have been a powerful card in English hands. In fact, there was never any chance of this happening, any more than there was of Henry's election to the imperial crown, briefly mooted in 1519 when the Emperor Maximilian I died, to be succeeded by his grandson Charles V. That event altered the European situation. In Charles, the crowns of Spain, Burgundy, and Austria were united in an overwhelming complex of power that reduced all the dynasties of Europe, with the exception of France, to an inferior position. From 1521, Henry became an outpost of Charles V's imperial power, which at Pavia in 1525, for the moment, destroyed the rival power of France. Wolsey's attempt to reverse alliances at this unpropitious moment brought reprisals against the vital English cloth trade with the Netherlands, and lost the advantages that alliance with the victor of Pavia might have had. It provoked a serious reaction in England, and Henry concluded that Wolsey's usefulness might be coming to an end. And this leads us into a loss of popularity of Henry VIII. While the greatness of England in Europe was being shown up as a sham, the regime was also losing popularity at home. The fanciful expectations of the early days could not, of course, endure. Some measure of reality was bound to intrude. As it was, journalists and writers continued to be full of hope for a king who, from 1517, commanded the services of a new councillor, Sir Thomas More, one of the outstanding minds of the day. But More soon discovered that Henry found it easy to keep his enjoyment of learned conversation apart from the conduct of policy. Nothing for the moment could dent Wolsey's strength, and this had serious drawbacks for the king who supported him. The country was showing increasing signs of its discontent, and Wolsey's efforts to remedy grievances only exasperated men of influence without bringing satisfaction to the poor. I'm really struggling to speak tonight for some reason. Feelings came to the boil in the years 1523 to 24. Although he disliked parliaments, Wolsey had to agree to the calling of one in 1523, but the taxes voted were well below what was required. Next year, the attempt to levy a special tax led to such fierce resistance that Henry rescinded it, he and the cardinal both trying to take the credit for the remission of what they had been jointly responsible for imposing in the first place. While he had Wolsey to take the blame, Henry could afford such fiascos. The cardinal could not. By 1527, a government policy that, though seemingly Wolsey's, was really the king's, was facing bankruptcy. Ineffective abroad, unpopular at home, it made the regime look as empty of positive purpose as in fact it was. At this point, the king entertained affairs unmistakably and spectacularly, his failures so far had been his or Catherine's inability to provide a male heir to the throne. Several stillbirths and early deaths had left only a girl, the Princess Mary, who was born in 1516, to carry on the line, and no one relished the thought of a female succession with all the dynastic and political uncertainties it would bring. Being the man he was, Henry could not suppose the fault to be his. His rapidly growing aversion to Catherine was augmented by his infatuation with one of the ladies of the court, Anne Boleyn, the sister of one of his earlier mistresses. Henry was no profligate. Indeed, he had a strong streak of prudery, but he sought the occasional relief from marriage to a worthy but ailing wife, to which princes have generally been held entitled. In Anne he met his match. This 20-year-old girl, brought up in a tough school of courtly intrigue, would be more than a king's mistress. It took Henry, who in any case needed to marry her if the expected issue was to solve the succession problem, some 6 years to achieve their joint purpose. Inadvertently, he provoked a revolution. From 1527, Henry pursued what became known as the King's Great Matter, his divorce from Catherine. He convinced himself that his first marriage had been against the divine law, that is, against the biblical injunction forbidding marriage with a brother's widow. The deaths of the children proved God's judgment on the union. With his characteristic readiness to convert his own desires into the law of God, Henry rapidly assured himself that he was living in mortal sin with Catherine, and had to find relief if he was again to become acceptable to God. He appealed to Rome for a declaration of annulment. Popes had usually obliged kings in such matters, but Henry had picked both his time and his case badly. He was asking Pope Clement VII to help him discard the Emperor's aunt, but Clement, the Emperor's prisoner in 1527-28, never thereafter dared resist Charles, whose powerful feelings of familiar honour and public prestige barred any concession to Henry's wishes. Moreover, the Pope's reluctance was increased by the fact that he was being asked to declare illegal an earlier exercise of papal power, which had licensed Henry's marriage to his brother's widow, of a kind that brought a good deal of money to the papal coffers. Thus Henry's attempts to solve his dilemma in the accepted legal way were doomed from the start. Wolsey, in a worse dilemma, since only success in the impossible could keep him in power, obtained a trial of the case in England, but this was frustrated by his fellow judge Cardinal Campeggio on orders from Rome. Within weeks Wolsey was ousted, but his disappearance solved nothing, and the councillors who succeeded him could offer little help to their king, who knew only what he wanted, but not how to get it. The chancellorship went to Thomas More, and he told Henry that he did not approve of the divorce, and he wished to devote himself to fight against Lutheran heresy. Confusion was the keynote of policy for some 3 years, while the king dithered between hope that Rome might yet be forced to let the formal trial of his first marriage take place in England, and stirrings of a more radical nature to reject Rome outright. But though he occasionally talked of doing just that, neither he nor anyone else knew how to convert talk into action. So we now move on to the breach with Rome of Henry VIII. as God's deputy on earth. The revolution that he had not intended gave the king his wish. In January 1533 he married Anne Boleyn. In May a new Archbishop, Thomas Cranmer, presided over the formality of a trial that declared the first marriage annulled. In September the Princess Elizabeth was born. The Pope retaliated with a sentence of excommunication. It troubled no one. The supreme headship on earth over the Church of England, though he had not sought it, represented Henry's major achievement. It had very wide-ranging consequences, but those that immediately concerned the king were two. In the first place, the new title consolidated his own concept of kingship, his conviction that he had no superior on earth. It rounded off the majestic image of divinely instituted royal rule that it was Henry's constant ambition to present to an awed and obedient world. But in the second place, it created a real personal problem for the king. Earlier in his book, Assertio Septem Sacramentorum Adversus Martynum Lutherum, he had attacked Luther and had expressed a profound devotion to the papacy, and had been rewarded with the title of Defender of the Faith. Now he had turned against the Pope. His act was equal to encouraging the Protestant Reformation, a thing attractive to Cranmer and Cromwell, and perhaps Anne Boleyn, but not to Henry, who despised Luther. The religion of the newly independent church was for its head to settle. For the rest of his life, Henry, who prided himself on his theological learnings, was to give much time and thought to the nature of the true religion. With the exception of the papal primacy, he never gave up the main tenets of the faith in which he had grown up, but he changed his mind on details and arrived at an amalgam of his own, which transubstantiation, and clerical celibacy mingled with radical views about the world's authority of the church and man's ability to seek salvation without the aid of priests. Now, what about Henry's domestic reforms? Well, Cromwell's decade, the 1530s, was the only period of the reign during which a coherent body of policies was purposefully carried through. Cromwell's work greatly enlarged Henry's power, especially by transferring to the crown the wealth of the monasteries dissolved in 1536-40, and also new clerical taxes. But it also more explicitly than ever subjected the king to the law and to the legislative supremacy of Parliament. Since Henry knew how to work with parliaments, the immediate effect was to make him appear more dominant than ever, and to give to his reign a spurious air of autocracy. Spurious because in fact the rule of law remained to control the sovereign's mere will. The appearance of autocracy was misleadingly emphasized by the fact that all revolutions have their victims. As heads rolled, the king's earlier reputation as a champion of light and learning was permanently buried under his enduring fame as a man of blood. Old friends such as More, refusing to accept the new order, fell before the onslaught, as did some 50 other men caught by the treason laws. Between 1538 and 1541, the families of Pole and Courtenay were destroyed by the axe for treasons linked with efforts abroad to reverse the course of events in England, but mainly because they could claim royal blood and represented a dynastic danger to the unprolific Tudor line. The king now embarked on a series of matrimonial adventures that made him monster and a laughingstock. He soon died of Anne, who failed to produce a male heir. In 1536 she was executed, with other members of the court, for alleged treasonable adultery. Catherine of Aragon, rejected but unbowed, had died a little earlier. Henry immediately married Jane Seymour, who bore him his son Edward but died from complications of childbirth. The next 3 years after 1537 were filled with attempts to replace her, and the bride chosen was Anne, sister of the Duke of Cleves, a pawn in Cromwell's policy for a northern European alliance against danger from France and the Emperor. But Henry hated the first sight of her and at once demanded his freedom, an end achieved by a quick divorce. Oh, that's pretty outrageous. Basically, he found her butters. That sounded so posh. Butters. Henry thought, wait, who was it? Which one was this about? Anne? Anne was a Butters female. So he wanted to get out of there real quick. Right, moving into Henry's physical and mental decline. The Cleves fiasco destroyed Cromwell. It enabled his many enemies to turn the king against him, and in July 1540 his head fell on the scaffold. I'm definitely going to do a video on Oliver Cromwell, definitely. Henry had by now become truly dangerous, always secretive and suspicious. Now he was beginning to show paranoid tendencies. Convinced that he controlled everyone, he was in fact readily manipulated by those who knew how to feed his suspicions and pander to his self-righteousness. Full of experience, the oldest king in Europe, and increasingly competent in the routine of rule, Henry lacked the comprehensive vision and large spirit that would have made him a great man. His temperamental deficiencies were aggravated by what he regarded as his undeserved misfortunes, and by ill health. He grew enormously fat. His mind did not weaken, but he grew restless, peevish, and totally unpredictable. Often melancholy and depressed, he was usually out of sorts and always out of patience. In 1540-42, he briefly renewed his youth in marriage to the 20-year-old Catherine Howard, whose folly in continuing her promiscuity, even as queen, brought her to the block. The blow finished Henry. Thereafter he was a really sad and bitter old man, and though he married once more, to find a measure of peace with the calm and obedient Catherine Parr, his physical ruin was complete. But he was still the king, and from Cromwell's fall, the only maker of policy. Policy then, in the hands of a sick, unhappy, violent man, was not likely to be either sensible or prosperous, and so it proved. Left to himself, Henry concentrated on keeping the realm united. Despite the growing strife between the religious factions, and on keeping before the world his own image as the glorious monarch of the age. The first resulted in frequent explosions against the ingratitude of his subjects and against his counsellors. The second brought him back to his first love, war and conquest, the sport of kings. In 1542, the Emperor and the King of France resumed hostilities. Henry again joined the former. The Scots promptly joined the French. The Scots were routed at Solway Moss in 1542, and their king died soon after. This opened the possibility of subjugating that country permanently by means of a marriage alliance between the infant heirs to the two thrones. But the Scottish dream quickly collapsed as Henry's crude handling of that nation gave control to a pro-French party, resist even an alliance with England. Physical conquest was beyond the king's means. Henry personally managed both the war and the subsequent negotiations, and he displayed amazing energy for so sick a man. But energy is not the same thing as competence. The war proved ruinous. Money had to be raised by selling off the monastic lands, which had brought a good income. The desperate expedient of debasing the coinage, though it brought temporary succour, led to a violent inflation that made things worse. Yet even after the Emperor made peace with France in 1544, Henry would not let go until 2 years later. As the year 1546 drew to a close, it was apparent to all observers that the king had not long to live. Not that it was clear to the man most concerned. He continued as before, lamenting religious dissension, attending to the business of government, continuing the pretence of deathless majesty, destroying the powerful Howard family, whom he suspected of plotting to control his successor. Conscious almost to the very end, he died on January 28, 1547. He left the realm feeling bereft, and the government the more bewildered because, to the last, he had refused to make full arrangements for the rule of a boy king. So what was the legacy of Henry VIII? Well, as King of England from 1509 to 1547, Henry VIII presided over the beginnings of the English Reformation, which was unleashed by his own matrimonial involvements, even though he never abandoned the fundamentals of the Roman Catholic faith. Though exceptionally well served by a succession of brilliant ministers, Henry turned upon them all. Those he elevated, he invariably cast them down again. He was attracted to humanist learning and was something of an intellectual himself, but he was responsible for the deaths of the outstanding English humanists of the day. Though 6 times married, he left a minor heir and a dangerously complicated succession problem. Of his 6 wives, 2 joined a large tally of eminent persons executed for alleged treason, yet otherwise his regime observed the law of the land with painful particularity. Formidable in appearance, in memory and in mind, and fearsome of temper, he yet attracted genuine devotion and knew how to charm people. Monstrously egotistical and surrounded by adulation, he nevertheless kept a reasonable grasp on the possible. Forever taking false steps in politics, he emerged essentially unbeaten and superficially successful in nearly everything he attempted to do. Henry VIII has always seemed the very embodiment of true monarchy. Even his evil deeds, never forgotten, have been somehow amalgamated into a memory of greatness. He gave his nation what it wanted, a visible symbol of nationhood. He also had done something toward giving it a better government, a useful navy, a start on religious reform and social improvement. But he was not a great man in any sense. Although a leader in every fibre of his being, he little understood where he was leading his nation. But if he was neither statesman nor prophet, he also was neither the blood-stained monster of one tradition, nor the rowdy bon vivant of another. Though cold, self-centred, unforgiving, forever suspicious of the ways of the world, he could not descend to the second stereotype. Despite a ruthlessness fed by self-righteousness, he never took the pleasure in killing required of the first. Simply, he never understood why the life of so well-meaning a man should have been beset by so many unmerited troubles. I think to finish this video off, we'll we're going to take a look at just some like extra sort of weird facts about Henry VIII, and then we'll call it a day. So let's get into them now. Henry is said to have referred to his fourth wife Anne as a Flanders mare. A mare is a female, so we can be very sure this was not a compliment. His marriage to Anne of Cleves only lasted 6 months and 3 days before it was annulled. And his longest marriage was to Catherine of Aragon, which lasted 24 years. Henry VIII may have written a theological treatise called Defence of the Seven Sacraments. This was written as a reply to Martin Luther's criticism of the Catholic Church, and particularly to Luther's theological treatise Prelude on the Babylonian Captivity of the Church, which criticised some or all of the Catholic sacraments and attacked the papacy. King Henry VIII authorised the Great Bible, the first authorised edition of the Bible in English, to be read aloud in church. It was completed in 1539 and went through revisions between 1540 and 1541. Henry hung 2,000 tapestries in his palaces, whereas James V of Scotland only hung 200 in his palace. Henry was an excellent hunter and jouster, and also a skilled lute player. Henry could read and write in 3 languages: English, French, and Latin. Henry could sight read music. This means that he could read and play a piece of music he had not seen before, or at least that he had not prepared for. Henry VIII introduced a tax on beards, which varied with the beard wearer's social status. Henry became the King of England at the age of 17. Henry VIII made boiling a legal form of capital punishment. Nice. He also had a collection of weapons, including 6,500 handguns. He also slept with a gigantic axe beside him. Anne Boleyn, his second wife, is rumoured to have had an extra finger on her right hand. This may be a misconception for a few reasons, however. For example, when Boleyn's burial site was exhumed, none of the several bodies that were examined were found to have an extra finger. Henry's last words were allegedly monks, monks, monks. Fair enough. A common misconception about Henry is that he wrote the song Greensleeves, which in reality is quite unlikely. Henry loved to gamble and played dice. And finally, Henry was once gifted a bear by the King of Norway, described as a white bear. It was probably a polar bear and was allowed to swim and hunt fish in the Thames on a long leash. And that is going to do it for today's video. Certainly a super interesting and influential historical figure, particularly within British and European history. But yeah, I think I'd like to do a video specifically looking at Cromwell, because he was obviously a big driver in reform at the time and policies. So I think it'd be interesting to take a bit of a more focused look on him, but let me know if there's anyone else in particular you'd like to see an ASMR history video on, and I'll try to make these more regular. I think I just get so wrapped up doing the fact videos, the Reddit videos, etc., that I just sort of forgot about the history videos, but I do really like doing them, so think we're going to call it there. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, then as always, please